In the last lecture module, we introduced Goldman's solution to Gettier problems in the context of his causal theory from 1967. And we noted that Goldman's theory rebuts Gettier cases because it portrays them all as inference cases in which a causal chain is being reconstructed. And because this causal chain gets reconstructed incorrectly, all of these cases fail to count as knowledge on his view. Now, we probably ought to be suspicious of this idea precisely because we saw that having a false intermediary belief in the inferential justificational chain, that doesn't seem to be key to these examples. These examples all turn on the idea that, hey, there's this relationship that I depend on for the purposes of my inference or my perceptual judgment or so on, and that particular thing that I depend on, it doesn't work right this time, but I get lucky and my belief is true anyway. So the question is this: can we come up with a Gettier case that looks like it doesn't work for Alvin? Or at least one that he's going to have to bring a bunch of mechanisms to play to try and get around. Well, imagine I go to school and I see a poster up there, and the poster says there's going to be a party in dorm room 6 at 6 o'clock on Saturday. And I say, hey, that's fantastic. I'm going to go to that party. I go to dorm room number 6. There's the party. I have a true belief. It's justified. It must count as knowledge. Unbeknownst to me, however, the person who was going to throw that party, they in fact put that poster up with the intent to throw that party. So I've reconstructed the causal chain correctly from that person's intent to cause that party, and they're putting the poster up, and then my inferential reconstruction. However, they get hit by a car, and the party I go to isn't the party that they intended to throw at all, but they are the cause of it because it's their weight. Now it looks like Goldman's really got to squirm around. And of course, we can find easier cases when we go to non-inferential cases, which he doesn't really seem to consider as a possibility. So when we look at Chisholm's sheep in the field case, I look out in the field, I see a wolf, I think to myself, oh, there's a sheep out in the field. I have this perceptually formed belief. The belief actually happens to be true because there is a sheep out in the field. It's just not exactly where the wolf is. The wolf is blocking my view of it. And so it looks like Goldman would say, yeah, but the sheep didn't cause your belief via perception. But think about it. The wolf is in the field in front of the sheep because it's hunting the sheep. And so the sheep is the reason why the wolf is there, and the wolf is the reason why I formed my perceptual belief that there's a sheep in the field. Again, now Goldman's got to come up with a story about perception and when perception works and when it doesn't. And it can't just be that it doesn't count as perception when I don't get it right or it's a Gettier case. And so it's not as obvious at all, once we start looking at these cases carefully, whether or not the causal connection that Goldman seeks to invoke to avoid these Gettier cases will actually work for these cases. And overall, at first blush, the proposal might seem attractive. The theory is a traditional causal theory, insisting that causal connection between empirical fact and belief is necessary for knowledge. Yet, I'm going to maintain that you can easily discover cases without this causal pedigree that count as knowledge. So I'm descending a staircase, and as I'm doing it, I'm forming all these beliefs about where to put my foot next, but I'm not looking, all right? I'm able to place my foot so as to descend the staircase without tripping, but the next stair isn't the cause of my belief that of where the next stair is. In fact, it's just this sequence, this motor sequence that generates my movements in this symmetric fashion, that generates that belief, and not the stair itself. It just happens to be that they reliably correspond with one another. Here's another one. My visual system can detect the edges of objects by filtering light intensity arrays and using a point spread function, and by comparing color measurements. Now, edges often co-occur with color changes and changes in relative reflective light intensity, but those things don't always cause those things. So there's not a perfect causal connection there. There's just a reliable correlation. Here's another one. I can locate my car in the parking lot by its accidental visual properties. However, the relevant property, the fact, my ownership of the car, doesn't cause me to form my belief, hey, that's my car over there in the fourth stall. No, it is instead the accidental visual properties that cause me to form that belief. My ownership isn't causally efficacious in my belief forming process. Now, Goldman might claim that I have an inductive inference in this case, but it's not clear that I make any inductive inferences, and so it's a counterfactual inductive inference, perhaps. In each of these cases, it looks like I come to have a belief, and that belief seems to count as knowledge. Yet the belief isn't causally connected to the relevant object having the relevant property. Rather, the epistemic warrant of the belief seems to result from the fact that the cues upon which I base my inferences or my perceptual judgments and so on, they reliably co-vary with the state of affairs described by the belief. And that's why I call them reliable correlation cases. If these cases do seem to work, then it looks really bad for the causal theory of knowledge, because reliable correlations don't have to invoke causation at all in order to get their epistemic merit. In addition to problems with capturing the necessary conditions, I would also suggest that the theory seems to have difficulty capturing sufficient conditions as well. In these cases, conditions seem to be met, but the belief doesn't seem to count as knowledge, and I call these discrimination cases. So imagine Al Gore there, oh, he looks so young, walking through some fields. He sees a plant that looks like marijuana. He comes to believe that the plant is marijuana. As it happens, the plant is marijuana. This all looks like good perceptual belief formation on Goldman's view. However, it could have easily been any of a dozen other weeds that are common to the area. Old Al, not having much experience with marijuana plants, would have never been able to discriminate between those cases. Again, it looks like we've met Goldman's condition here. I form a belief based on perception. The fact that there's a marijuana plant causes me to believe that there's a marijuana plant, and so it all looks good. But when I take into account the fact that any of 6 other different kinds of plants would have caused that same belief had those been the plants, then it looks to undermine my epistemic merit in those circumstances. I might well suggest that these cases seem to undermine Goldman's causal theory's claim to capturing the sufficient conditions. So there are troublesome cases for the Gettier instances, there are troublesome cases for necessity conditions, troublesome cases for sufficiency conditions. There are other difficulties. It's a look in the footnotes, for example, but we won't dwell on it any longer. We'll go ahead and set it aside, just as Goldman did. In fact, Goldman set it aside for precisely the reasons that I start to mention here at the end of the lecture, namely that he starts to realize, hey, wow, the problem with this account that I've been giving is that what really seems to matter in these cases is that the causal connection is a reliable belief-forming mechanism. What matters is perception is reliable, memory is reliable. When I reconstruct causal chains from evidence back to a fact, then those reconstructions, when they count as knowledge, are reliable, and so on. And so we'll see when we look at our next article in the next lecture that Goldman's move is to take that non-causal feature and instead use that to define justification, moving from his I don't have a view about justification, I've got a theory of knowledge in 1967, up to a theory of justification that fits in with the justified true belief definitional theory of knowledge.